Today's message is entitled The Quickening, and I have to say that in consideration of that title, that whole idea was what brought me into this work. When I was 16 years old, there was then a feeling of that was a possibility for humanity, a quickening. And what that means to each of us appears differently in how and what we access in our life experience. And no matter what has come upon the radar in terms of life events and changes and wars and rumors of wars, there is always this feeling that humanity is being quickened. And I guess I wanted to take a little bit of a pulse with you. Raise your hand if you feel that that is true, that there is a quickening with humanity that is happening. Some of you didn't raise your hand. And that's perfect because you're going through a process of reevaluation. And that's fine. I wanted to, no matter how that shows up in this life experience, this idea of a quickening, there is a feeling, at least with people, that they're wanting life to be more real, more authentic, and in conversation, in dialogue. And there is a letting go of that which no longer serves, that which is false to fact, people questing for the truth. And since my wife and I came here on April 3rd, we've been so busy with all the mundane aspects of life, and we have started to get out and enjoy Vancouver, which is a beautiful place, to find interactions with people that may evidence the quickening within them. And one day last week, I went down to Granville Island, and that was, what a gas, what a place. What a great place. And then I also went to Banyan Books. Yeah. And I went through that place, and all these books were saying, "Choose me, choose me." And I said, I'll be back. But what I saw in those stacks were evidence of quickening with people. Hundreds, thousands of books. Evidence of a way of that people were dealing with the quickening within their own lives, quickening to the Spirit. And people, all just like ourselves, going through situations and circumstances of letting go of a past that no longer worked for them, and then coming out the other side and saying, I want to share, I want to write a book. I want to uplift humanity in my own way. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing to uplift people. I was talking with my father-in-law some time ago. My father-in-law is an amazing man. He just turned 90, and he still has an active therapeutic practice out of his home because he's a wise man. And I love him. And we were talking about church and spiritual work, and he said, I've always felt that giving a Sunday message, he calls it a sermon, but I don't really like that word. It's kind of an old world word. I like message. But he said, the primary objective of a Sunday message is to uplift people. That they're going through so much, and he's worked with thousands of people over the years. Well, hundreds. But the message behind closed doors in a counseling session or in a place like this is to uplift. And I said, I agree, but there's something else. And that something else is to instruct. Not about telling people what to do, but having a dialogue. And when I looked at the word instruct, I saw the words inner structure. To talk and to address the inner structures that you and I have within us. Because so often we are caught up into comparison with other people about who it is that we think that we are. And a lot of the time, my work has shown that we suffer because we compare ourselves with other people instead of looking at the inner structures of our own being and calling that forth. And that's the real purpose, is to give attention to what it is that we are as spiritual beings. Because we are spiritual beings, living in a spiritual universe and governed by spiritual law. We might throw a ball in the air and it comes down and says, no, we're governed by physical law. But really, in the inner structures of self, we are governed by spiritual laws. And law, really the law of love and oneness, and that you and I are continually endeavoring to clear the inner structures of our being so that we can access love and oneness, to be aware of it, to live it. That's my truth. I don't know about you, where you're at on your spiritual journey, but that's what occurs to me within my own being. And so when I was at Banyan Books, I was looking at all of the offerings like fruit on a tree. But what was the core? What was the trunk? What was the roots, at least in my observation? And I looked at some of the ancient texts, the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads of the East, and the Kabbalah and the great wisdom teachings of mystical Christianity. One book I didn't see there much or at all was the Bible. Maybe I wasn't looking closely enough. And when we talk about the Bible and unity, it's not about a moral code of how you are supposed to live. Everyone in this room is a mature soul. You no longer require being told what to do, how to live, or what to believe. You are desiring a mystical experience of oneness with the divine. That's what I require. You desire a quickening within your own being. Sometimes when I feel a little bit emotional, people sometimes later come up to say, "Are you okay?" I assure you, I'm fine. What goes on with me is that my heart is opened. And it affects my emotions. Because you and I are engaged in a divine remembrance, a self-inquiry into the knowledge, the gnosis, which is a Greek word, the gnosis of the self-knowledge, and that there are many places such as this where people come and they're invested in having an experience through devotion. And what in the East is called bhakti yoga. Yoga meaning union with the one through devotion. There's another yoga called jnana yoga, which is the path of wisdom, the path of self-knowledge. And that's what this path, at least to me, is primarily. And one person came up to me just during the greeting and they asked, is it okay that during some of the music that we get up and dance? And I said, absolutely. Because you're celebrating the one life and the one presence. Why hold back? Bhakti, devotion, praise for the one presence and one power. Whatever it is that ignites your soul, that allows the quickening. That's what this is all about, folks. Someone said the other day to me that Canadians are just a little bit more reserved than Americans, and I said, maybe. But there is this wonderful passion. There is this wonderful aliveness within all of us, regardless of country, where there is a deep desire, a deep yearning to allow the quickening of what it is that we are to come forth. That's what the teachings are all about, to come forth into the actual nature of what it is that we are, to go beyond the beliefs that have all types of baggage. Nothing wrong with having cherished beliefs, but how do they allow us to access our true aliveness? So we're talking about really inner development here. Now, I was talking about the Bible. A lot of people think that in New Thought type of work that it's just not cool anymore. Well, maybe not. Because of this whole idea that the Bible is perhaps been enforced upon us at an early age, which reinforced a moral code of how to live, how to treat one another, and so forth, which is all formative. But in the Unity tradition, there has always been this focus on metaphysical understanding of these 64 books that were written over a period of about 800 years. It's not just one little package. And I came to consider this story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Metaphysically, it is about Jacob, who represents the mind. In fact, your mind right now. A state of consciousness of our own mind. Personal mind, wrestling with the angel, which is a symbol of the I am identity, the actual self that is moving in consciousness all the time. And we wrestle with this identity. We wrestle with it. And a lot of times we resist. But there is this point within us that says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that's what you and I are really, this path is all about, is allowing that I am, that eternal identity to bless the mind, to come into a greater knowing of self. And I bring this whole issue up around the Bible, really not so much to illuminate the stories within it, but to offer a place of healing around it. Because we can only be quickened to the extent that we allow ourselves to be freed up from the past beliefs and the images that govern us. That is, in essence, the healing, helping process. To let go of that which no longer serves. I hear the voice of innocence. Speaking of innocence, the spiritual life is really of a human being coming into this form world in a state of innocence and of going through great experience, great volumes of experience, and then coming out the other side with no fear and a realization that there is no death. Being a victorious being. Does anyone else desire that in this life situation, to be a victorious being? And how often do we, I remember a time in my early 20s where I literally said to myself, I don't know if I'm going to make this. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if I'm going to adjust to the demands of adulthood and be a person in the world. And I had thoughts of going, I really don't know that I even want to be here anymore. But day in and day out, just moving forward, next step, next step, next step. And it started to kind of even out around the age of 30. Thank God for perseverance. So, we're really working to be free of the afflictions of the mind. And I had a Unity minister one time, years ago, that said, a minister's job is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I said, I reflected on this the other day, and I said, I'm really not into afflicting anyone. But what it is that I am about is being a catalyst for moving out of complacency. Being a catalyst for moving out of complacency. And over the years, so many people have come to me for sharing, counseling, whatever. And there is this underlying theme of kind of like stuckness. How can I move out of my complacency? And I say, what is your concept of God? And usually it's a concept of something other than immediacy or immanence of self, something that's judging them. And that's where a lot of this religious kind of abuse or whatever, that when we say we're going to study the Bible or look at the Bible, we go, you might say, oh, I don't know about that. Because of my past, because of a concept of God that isn't functional in this here and now life, and I turn rather to Buddhism or Hinduism or some other ism that isn't about that. But there's great essence, there is great mysticism and presence within those books, as well as so many others. So I'm not here to, if I had a Bible with me, I'm not here to thump on it. In Unity tradition, the Bible is a roadmap of the soul, a roadmap of the unfoldment of the soul from innocence to great experience through victory and through ascension, if you like. The overcoming of fear and to being the actual self that is the actual plan. That the teachings of Jesus are an outpicturing of an internal process of overcoming and through great experience and then victory and ascension. So back in my time at Banyan Books, I was standing there with a friend who we had very little time, but I got the imprint of that place. And the imprint was that there is a statement that says a collective yes. Yes to life. Yes to the overcoming. Yes to the hero's journey. Yes to being the being that we are. That everyone that wrote a book in that place, and that were on the stacks, it was all about yes. And what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful stand for life. So I do believe that there is a quickening that is taking place. And I hold that even in the face of the appearances of the world. You know, the world is just a made-up story of agreements about the mind. And the mind gets together with another mind and says, ain't it terrible? Oh, it's just terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Don't you believe that? And someone says, no. Well, you can't play with us then. You go find some other friends, because we're in complete agreement that the world is in a process of breakdown versus breakthrough. And the forms of the world may indeed break down before there is breakthrough, but the question is, who are you in the midst of it all? Who are you? Where do we stand in the midst of the dissolution of forms? Are we eternal beings, or are we buffeted about by circumstance and condition? Years ago, there was a woman at our center in Cottonwood. She had a malady, a disease, and she could hardly walk. But she would come in and she would find a place to sit. And I was giving a talk that day, a message called Illness as Teacher. And I said that, any challenge that we're having, any illness, any malady, whatever, is a teacher. It's not something wrong. In the Unity tradition back in the 50s and the 60s and even before, there was this concept that if there was something wrong in body, mind, or spirit, then we were missing the mark, and that we needed to have a correction in consciousness. Well, I just thought that was metaphysical malpractice. I just don't agree. And after that lesson or message, she came up to me and she says, I finally heard someone speak to the truth about our challenges. Because she'd been living with this for a long, long time. And she says, illness is a teacher. It is a revealer. It is an uncoverer of the actual self. There's an old saying that when things are going great in life, that the soul is resting. But when it's challenging, the soul is struggling to find its true essence. It's just the opposite that we might think. So when you're going through stuff, I invite you to, and I invite me, to claim that there's nothing wrong, but that my soul is asserting itself to understand who it is that we are. There's a book that I would like to share just a little bit from. It's called A Year Without Fear by Tama Kieves. She was an attorney trained at Harvard, graduated with honors, and yet she was not on her sole purpose. And she said this in the first page of this book. By the way, she decided to drop all that and become a writer to fulfill her heart's desire. She said, "This is the year I stopped pressing my nose up against the glass, wishing for another life. This is the year I love with banshee strength. This is the year I end the race. I enter the haven of a life that has waited for me all along. This is the year I become a master of where I place my attention. My focus is my life. This is the year I open to the flow that will take me all the way, but not the way I know. This is the year I wake up in the story of a lifetime, because I have become a storyteller who knows great love." In the dynamic of being a promoter of life, oftentimes I feel like a cheerleader. Yay, yay, you can do it, yay, right? Much of the New Thought movement over the years with self-development and someone that's a motivational speaker and some venues and so forth is kind of like a cheerleader. And that's one piece of this, but there are other deeper aspects that need to be addressed. And I want to share, almost in closing, a selection by a man named John Tarrant. This book is called The Light Inside the Dark. This is a wonderful book. Bonnie's going to get mad at me for not ordering a bunch of copies or something. Oh, where's that book? I want to buy that book. Anyway, this is called, this chapter 2, It's called The Wildness Inside and the Creatures to be Found There. Sounds kind of like a bedtime story or something, doesn't it? But this is entitled Into the Primeval Place. It says, the interior life is a place of the wild, uncivilized, and unpredictable, giving us fevers and symptoms and moments of impossible beauty. Yet within the appearances of chaos are both a richness and a deep level of orderliness. Like a national park, the interior world doesn't do anything. It is the treasure house of life. It can't be strip-mined for our conscious purposes. The only request it makes of us is that we love it, and in return it responds to our attention. To learn to attend well is to discover our place in the natural order. It brings an element of consistency and harmony to our lives and gives us a story about who we are. To learn to attend is a beginning. To learn to attend more and more deeply is the path itself. So this is about, yes, cheerleading, and yeah, you can do it, but it's also about going into the depth of self and to creating a deep, wonderful texture that we can all be nourished by on deeper and deeper levels. And I would assert that you and I are attending here now. We are attending to our actual identity. We are attending to letting go of the false and being real. We are attending to cultivating our spiritual authority. And it's good. It's rich. It's deep. You are as God created you, and together we are going to continually unveil that truth. Thank you very much.